Nick Hawthorne's hand hovered in the air, trembling. Every conversation in the restaurant had stopped. Forks hung mid-bite. Even the pianist hesitated before resuming the soft melody that now seemed far too intimate for the room. Across from him, Ava Brown, the only black waitress in Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, stood frozen, a tray balanced on her palm. Her eyes flicked to the boy's father, to the manager glowering in the corner, then back to the small, tentative hand reaching for hers. "Sir, control your son," the manager snapped, his voice cutting through the hush. "This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here to entertain children." Thomas Hawthorne, billionaire and master of his surroundings, felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. This was supposed to be a quiet dinner, their first in public since the accident that had left Nick in metal leg braces. "Nick," he said, his voice low and final, "sit down." But the boy didn't move. His hands stayed in the air, eyes locked on Ava with a fragile kind of hope that made something in her chest ache. In 5 years at Kingsley's, Ava had learned the art of invisibility. She kept her head down, endured the glances that judged her skin before her service, and never, ever drew attention. But there was a determination in Nick's gaze that she couldn't turn away from. She set the tray on a nearby table, untied her apron, and let it drop onto the silver platter. "I can't dance in an apron," she said softly and took his hand. Thomas's chair scraped the floor as he stood. "What do you think you're doing?" "Accepting an invitation," she replied, her voice steady as her eyes met his. The boy's first step was awkward and slow, the steel of his braces squealing against the floor. Ava didn't try to lead him. She matched his pace, one deliberate step at a time. The room remained silent, the air thick enough to feel on the skin. Thomas's breath caught, not at the sight of his son's uneven steps, but at the memory it awakened. Elizabeth, his late wife, dancing with Nick in their living room, her voice floating back to him. "It's not about perfection, Thomas. It's about connection." By the time they returned to the table, Nick's shy smile had replaced the guarded expression he'd worn for 2 years. Ava released his hand. "Thank you for asking me out," she said as though speaking to a grown man. "It was an honor." She turned to leave, but Thomas's voice stopped her. "Your name?" "Ava Brown." He repeated it, committing it to memory, then took a card from his jacket. "My office. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Ava accepted the card without a word. As she walked away, Nick glanced up at his father. "Dad, why?" Thomas didn't answer. He only stared at the space where Ava had stood, wondering why 3 unsteady steps had shaken something in him that all his power had never touched. The lobby of Hawthorne Tower shimmered with glass and marble, reflecting the cold precision of the man whose name was etched in silver above the entrance. Commuters in tailored suits streamed through security gates, the click of polished shoes echoing in the vast space. Ava Brown stood at the reception desk, clutching the worn leather strap of her purse. She had chosen her best outfit, a navy skirt and crisp white blouse bought on clearance, but it still felt like a disguise in this temple of wealth. "Ava Brown to see Mr. Hawthorne," she told the receptionist. The woman's eyes scanned her from head to toe with the practiced efficiency of someone who could measure status in seconds. She picked up the phone, murmured something, then handed Ava a sleek visitor's badge. 18th floor. "Miss Winters will meet you." The elevator's mirrored walls threw her reflection back at her. A woman who had worked 3 jobs without complaint, who knew how to smile at customers who looked right through her. But this meeting was different. She wasn't here to serve. She wasn't even sure why she was here at all. When the doors opened, Miss Winters was waiting, impeccable in a charcoal skirt suit, posture razor sharp. "Follow me," she said, her voice clipped. They walked past glass offices where men in silk ties talked into wireless headsets. Ava could feel eyes following her, curiosity pricking the air. A black woman being escorted through Hawthorne's executive floor was enough to stir whispers. Winters slowed slightly, her voice lowering. "He had you fired, didn't he? Happens all the time. Powerful clients call and people like you lose their jobs." Ava stopped mid-step. "People like me?" "You know what I mean," Winters replied without looking at her. "Employees who don't know their place." Ava's lips curved, though it wasn't a smile. "And where exactly would that be?" Winters didn't answer. A phone rang from somewhere inside an office. "He'll see you now." Thomas Hawthorne's office dominated half the floor, a glass wall opening onto a skyline that seemed to kneel at his feet. He stood with his back to the view, hands in his pockets. "Miss Brown, he said, turning. "Thank you for coming. Sit." She took the chair across from his desk, her posture steady. He studied her in silence for several moments, the kind of silence designed to make the other person speak first. She didn't. "Do you have a background?" he asked finally. "Excuse me?" "Education. College. I have a bachelor's degree in child development from NYU. Nearly finished my master's in special education before I had to leave to take care of my sister." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? "And you work as a waitress?" "I work 3 jobs," she corrected. "The restaurant, a bookstore on weekends, and tutoring when I can find students." Thomas moved to his desk and opened a folder. "I did some research. You co-founded a program called Freedom Steps." He pulled out photos of a modest dance studio with children in wheelchairs and braces. A dance program for children with physical disabilities, now about to close due to lack of funding. Ava's gaze didn't waver. "I assumed you'd find all that out." "I'm offering you a position," Thomas said, "as a therapeutic companion for Nick." The words hung between them. Ava leaned back. "No." His head snapped up. "Do you realize what I'm offering? I could pay you 5 times what you make now. And I don't work for people who see only my color or my social class before they see my competence," she said evenly. "And I won't be paid to pretend to care." His jaw tightened. "You're turning down an offer that could solve all your financial problems?" "I'm turning down an offer that would put me in a cage. Nick doesn't need another employee. He needs space to lead his own life." "You don't know my son." "No," she agreed. "But I know what happens when people put up invisible walls around children like him. They stop seeing what's possible." She reached into her purse and placed a worn business card on his desk. "Freedom Steps. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4. First class is free." Then she stood, smoothing her skirt. "If you'd like to see what I mean, bring him." She left without waiting for his reply. Thomas stared at the card long after the door clicked shut. The Bentley didn't belong here. It was the kind of street where the cracks in the pavement told the history of winters too harsh for city budgets, where the air smelled faintly of fried food from the corner deli, and where children played in front of chain-link fences topped with rust. Yet there it was, black paint gleaming, chrome catching the sunlight like a warning flare. From the driver's seat, Thomas Hawthorne sat like a man at the edge of enemy territory. He stared at the squat brick building in front of him, its paint peeling, its hand-painted sign reading, "Freedom Steps, your rhythm, your rules." Beside him in the back seat, Nick craned his neck, watching a small group of children through the open double doors. Some were in wheelchairs. One boy wore a bright orange prosthetic leg. A girl with crutches was spinning herself in small, deliberate circles. "Are we going in?" Nick asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. This was supposed to be reconnaissance. Drop the boy off, observe for a few minutes, and confirm his suspicions that this was nothing more than an amateur passion project. Then he'd take Nick back to his world, where experts in tailored lab coats charged by the hour and outcomes were measurable in charts. Before he could form an excuse, the passenger door swung open. Amelia Brown, Ava's sister, leaned in. She wore a deep green headscarf and an expression that suggested she wasn't easily impressed. "You're blocking the driveway," she said matter-of-factly. Nick glanced at his father, then at Amelia. "We're here for the dance class." "Then come on in." Thomas hesitated. Men like him didn't walk into places like this. Not without a press release, not without security, not without a reason that would look good in an annual report. But Nick had already unbuckled and was stepping out carefully, adjusting the straps on his braces. And for the first time in months, Thomas followed his son's lead. The interior of Freedom Steps was nothing like the pristine, glass-walled therapy centers Thomas knew. The floor was polished wood, uneven in places. The walls were covered in handmade posters with bright, messy lettering. "Every move counts. Let at your own pace. Your rhythm, your rules." There were no uniforms, no rows of identical equipment. Children moved freely, some to the music playing through an old speaker, others in their own private rhythms. "This looks chaotic," Thomas murmured to Ava when she approached. "There's structure," she replied, "just not the kind you recognize." She crouched so she was at Nick's eye level. "Would you like to join the group?" Nick glanced at his father. "Go ahead," Thomas said, though his voice was tight. "I'll be right here." Ava led him toward the children, matching her steps to his pace. Thomas watched from a folding chair near the wall, his eyes following every movement. A tall, older woman entered through the side door, leaning on an ornate cane. Her gray hair was plaited into elegant braids, her eyes sharp and knowing. Dr. Serena Page. Thomas knew the name. He had rejected 3 of her research proposals in the past 2 years. "Mr. Hawthorne," she greeted without warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here. I oversee the research program here," she explained. "We're studying how non-directive movement approaches affect neural reconfiguration in children with motor challenges." "I thought this was just a community dance class," Thomas said. "It's a pilot motor rehabilitation program," Ava interjected, returning from the group. "Based on the theory of movement autonomy. We integrate adaptive dance with neuroscience principles." "Then why work as a waitress?" "Because people like you rejected our proposals," Ava replied evenly. 3 times. It hit him like a splash of cold water. "You were Dr. Page's assistant?" "Co-author," Dr. Page corrected. "Her theoretical work is groundbreaking." Thomas studied Ava. "You knew who I was at the restaurant." "From the moment you walked in," she confirmed. "When Nick stood up to dance, I saw a chance to show you what words on a proposal never could." "Was it staged?" His voice was sharper now. "The dance? No. Nick chose to get up. I chose to follow." The front door opened again. A cluster of journalists walked in, cameras slung over their shoulders. Thomas's jaw tightened. "What is this?" he demanded. "Part 2 of the plan," Ava said calmly. Amelia handed him a copy of a fresh online article. "Revolutionary motor rehabilitation method shows promising results." "You used my son for a publicity stunt?" His voice was ice. Ava motioned for him to follow her into a small side room. The walls were covered in photos of children, each with handwritten notes of their progress. On the last wall was an empty frame. "What's that?" Thomas asked. "Our future. A full rehabilitation center. 500 children a year instead of 50. You orchestrated all of this." "I saw an opportunity," she said simply. 4 months ago, when you canceled our meeting without reading our proposal, I promised myself I'd find another way." Before Thomas could respond, Amelia's voice called from the main room. "It's Nick." They rushed back to find the boy in the center of the floor. Someone had stopped the music. Nick had removed one of his braces and was standing, trembling, on a single support. "Nick," Thomas began, stepping forward. "Wait," Ava whispered. The boy took a deep breath, focused, and moved. 1 step. Small, shaky, but entirely his own. The children cheered. Cameras flashed. Thomas's chest tightened. He had seen thousands of deals close, fortunes shift, markets turn, but never had a single step undone him like this one. The sound of Nick's lone brace clicking against the floor was deafening in the sudden quiet. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, but his chin was lifted, not in defiance, not in fear, but in the kind of focus that made the rest of the world disappear. Thomas stood frozen, halfway between moving forward to steady him and holding back to see what would happen next. For 2 years, every instinct had been to help, to guide, to catch, to make sure his son never stumbled. But something in Ava's voice, "Wait. Watch," had anchored his feet to the floor. Nick shifted his weight. The metal brace on his right leg squealed faintly as he lifted his left foot, holding his balance with delicate precision. His lips pressed together, eyes narrowed, and then, step. Small, shaky, but entirely his. No guiding hand. No careful correction. Just Nick choosing the movement and owning it. The room erupted in cheers. Children clapped and shouted. Cameras flashed like sudden bursts of lightning. Even Dr. Page, usually composed and dignified, was smiling openly, her eyes bright. Thomas's throat tightened. He had seen this boy through hospital rooms, through gritted teeth physiotherapy sessions, through tears when frustration boiled over, but never like this. Never leading. Nick looked up, searching for his father's face in the crowd. Thomas met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the noise faded. It was just the two of them. And in that moment, Thomas realized he wasn't looking at a child to be protected. He was looking at a person finding his own power. "Mr. Hawthorne," a reporter's voice cut through the applause, "could we have a comment on your presence here today? We understand your foundation rejected this program's funding 3 times. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thomas could feel every camera lens trained on him, waiting to catch either his retreat or his transformation. He could walk out, maintain control, avoid vulnerability. That was the easy move, the safe move, the old move. Or he could follow his son's lead. Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady but uncharacteristically open. "You know what's hardest for someone in my position?" He began, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Admitting when we're wrong." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. "The Hawthorne Foundation is committing to fully fund Freedom Steps for the next 5 years," he continued, "and to build a permanent rehabilitation center based on the methodology developed by Dr. Page and Ms. Brown." The cameras went into a frenzy. Amelia gasped audibly. Dr. Page gave a sharp nod of approval. "On one condition," Thomas added, turning to Ava. Her jaw tensed. "Which is?" "That you retain complete autonomy over the program and its methodology. No corporate interference. Not from me. Not from anyone." For the first time since meeting him, Ava's guarded expression cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of surprise, and maybe something like respect. She extended her hand. "Deal." 3 months later, the empty lot next to the warehouse was a construction site. Bulldozers carved into the earth, steel beams rose against the skyline, and bright banners read, "Future home of the Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center." Thomas attended board meetings he once would have delegated, reading scientific papers marked with Ava's notes. He still wore tailored suits, but sometimes they were dusted with sawdust from afternoon site visits. One day, as they stood reviewing floor plans, Ava glanced over. "I never thought you'd be the type to show up in person. I never thought I'd have to study neuroplasticity at 50, he said dryly, rubbing his eyes. "Is this public penance or genuine interest?" He didn't look up from the plans. Nick asked to have his second brace removed last week. His old physical therapist said that would be impossible for at least 2 years. And I told her she was wrong. Just like you did. He gestured toward a photograph of Nick balancing with a single crutch. "Turns out you were right." Ava studied him for a moment. "You still haven't apologized. I funded your program. Changed policies. Redirected resources. That's not an apology. That's compensation." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then with a small nod he said, "Fair." Again. 6 months later, the new center opened with a ceremony that filled the main hall with families, reporters, and donors. Children of every mobility level moved freely across the space. Some in wheelchairs, others with prosthetics, all of them alive with energy. In the center, Nick led a short, choreographed routine with 3 other kids. His movements were still limited, but the confidence in them was undeniable. He beamed as he helped a younger boy through the final sequence, his hands steady, his voice encouraging. Thomas stood at the edge of the crowd, not interfering. "He doesn't need you to hold him anymore," Ava said, stepping up beside him. "No," Thomas agreed. "But he still needs me to be here. That's different." She looked at him curiously. "And what's that difference worth to you?" "Everything," he said simply. A reporter approached with a microphone. "Mr. Hawthorne, how does it feel to see your son's progress?" Thomas glanced toward Nick, who was now laughing with his peers. "Proud," he said. "Not just of what he's overcome, but of what he's creating for others." "And the biggest lesson you've learned?" Thomas looked directly into the camera. "That true leaders aren't the ones who insist on guiding every step. They're the ones who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better way." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the new Freedom Steps Rehabilitation Center, catching the smooth curves of the adaptive ramps and the gleaming hardwood of the dance floor. The air buzzed with excitement. Families arrived in waves, children in wheelchairs, on crutches, or wearing brightly colored braces. 4 months, Thomas had watched the blueprints turn into walls, and the walls into something alive. A place that didn't just accommodate disability but celebrated possibility. He stood near the entrance now, shaking hands with donors and volunteers, but his gaze kept drifting to the center of the main hall. Nick was there, brace only on his left leg, helping a younger girl adjust her balance before their big performance. His movements were careful, but his smile was the kind that lit up his whole face, open, unguarded, unafraid. Ava approached, wearing the Freedom Steps logo on a soft gray t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Nervous?" she asked. "Not for him," Thomas said, eyes still on Nick. "For me. He's going to do something today that I can't take credit for. I'm still getting used to that. That's the point, she said softly. You don't need to lead him anymore. Just be present. The hum of conversation faded as the lights dimmed and the music began. Something warm, steady, with a beat that encouraged movement rather than perfection. 4 children stepped into the open space. Nick, the little girl he'd been helping, and 2 others with their own distinctive gaits. The choreography was simple, but it was theirs, adapted to their strengths, leaving room for their own flourishes. Thomas watched Nick lead the group with quiet confidence, his timing impeccable, his joy palpable. And when the younger girl stumbled, Nick steadied her without taking over, letting her find her balance again before continuing. The applause at the end was deafening. Parents wiped tears. Children laughed. Camera shutters clicked like rain. Thomas clapped along, but his eyes never left his son. Later, as the crowd mingled, a reporter found Thomas near the refreshment table. "Mr. Hawthorne, how does it feel to see all this after just 1 year?" Thomas glanced around. The walls were lined with photos from the past months. Children taking their first independent steps, dancing with siblings, laughing mid-movement. In the corner, Dr. Page was deep in conversation with a group of young therapists, while Amelia was explaining the center's new outreach program to a local council member. "I feel proud," Thomas said finally. "Not just of what my son has achieved, but of what he's given to others. This place exists because he reminded me that leadership isn't always about steering, it's about having the courage to follow someone else's rhythm." The reporter smiled. "And the boy who inspired all of this, what's next for him?" Thomas's gaze found Nick, now kneeling beside a new student in a wheelchair, explaining something with his hands while the child listened intently. "What's next? Whatever he decides. My job now is to make sure nothing gets in his way." The ribbon cutting had been only the beginning. Freedom Steps had since opened 2 satellite programs, one in Newark, one in Philadelphia, and was in talks to partner with a major children's hospital. Ava had accepted the Pediatric Rehabilitation Innovation Award, though she insisted the program's real achievements belonged to the kids. Nick had transitioned into a regular school with an adaptive PE program, and on weekends he served as a youth ambassador for Freedom Steps. He'd even spoken, without a script, at a conference on inclusive education where he ended by saying, "Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is not help them, just give them space to try." Thomas had been in the audience that day, just as he had been for every public step Nick had taken since that night at Kingsley's. He no longer sat with folded arms in the back. He sat where Nick could see him, where the boy would know he was there, not to direct but to witness. In the quiet of his office one evening, Thomas kept returning to a framed photograph on his desk. It showed Nick and Ava side by side at the new center's opening, Nick mid-laugh, Ava mid-step, both utterly present in the moment. Beneath it, in Ava's neat handwriting, was a simple line. "It's not about perfection. It's about connection." Thomas smiled faintly. In his world, deals were signed in glass towers, fortunes built on numbers. But the greatest return on investment he'd ever seen had come from 3 unsteady steps: a waitress's courage, and the realization that sometimes the most powerful move is to follow. And that was a lesson no amount of money could ever buy. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Subscribe and join us for more stories that prove compassion can change the world.